The history of the Communist International fits in with the continuity of the entire Marxist movement. The key question is how to develop parties that can embody all of the lessons of the working class movement in previous history, and find a way to connect those ideas with the masses of the working people in preparation for struggle for power. The purpose of the Communist International was to heal the break that had occurred in the socialist movement in 1914 with the outbreak of World War I. The great betrayal of the workers' movement by the Socialist International in breaking up internationalism by pitting workers against each other in the great fire of World War I, posed the question of organizing from a fresh start the revolutionary forces in the workers' movement. The initial gathering of all of these forces took place at a conference in Zimmerwald, Switzerland in 1915. And it was no more than about 20 or 30 people who showed up for this thing. We're all aware of the quip by Lenin that all of the internationalists in the world at that time could fit into 2 stagecoaches. That was not far from the truth. They had to start from scratch, start all over, without the support of the infrastructure of these mass socialist parties around the world. But the political principles that were involved were the ones that were most important, and so start they did. Over the course of time, by staying the course, because of the work that Lenin and the Bolsheviks had done in the previous period, they were able to actually turn the war crisis in Russia into the revolutionary conquest of power by the working class. When the working class came into motion in February of 1917, overthrew the monarchy and began to try to figure out how to reorganize society. And that opened up great new possibilities for building the revolutionary socialist movement on a world basis. Now this opening happened in not the most advanced portion of the capitalist world, but actually in the most backward country in Europe. It was isolated from the start. It was 70% peasant. It was 70% illiterate. So the challenges of starting to build the new world from this backward position were such that the Russian Bolsheviks could not shirk the duty of actually taking advantage of the opening to take power and to begin the job of reorganizing society on a socialist basis. But they knew they couldn't finish the job with the low level of forces, productive forces that they had inside of Russia at the time. So they were looking to help from the working class in other countries in Europe and the more advanced countries, particularly Germany, to make their own revolution, to help give them the material and moral support to continue the fight of building socialism in the young Soviet Union. But the German left was in crisis. The German Social Democratic Party was the jewel in the crown of the Second International. It was the biggest party in the International. It had started from meager beginnings and actually created the labor movement in Germany. They had dozens of daily newspapers. They had elected officials in the Reichstag and in local councils all over Germany. But the reformists, the opportunists who had led the break with internationalism, controlled this entire apparatus. And the left opposition that began organizing inside of the German social democracy really didn't start to get going until about 1915, 1916, after the war crisis was already underway. Under the conditions of the repression from the state and the bureaucratic stifling of by this leadership, that it had very meager beginnings of this left opposition. But it was the founding of the Spartacus magazine in January of 1916 that finally gave an organized pole around which this left wing could start to organize. The followers of this magazine were, of course, called the Spartacists. That's where the name came from. And chief among the leaders of this tendency were, of course, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, who was elected PM in the Reichstag. Now, Liebknecht had originally voted in favor of the war credits in August of 1914, mistakenly following party discipline, along with all the other Social Democratic deputies in voting for this. But later figured out that he had made a mistake, and he voted against it. He was the sole deputy to vote against the next vote on war credits at the end of the year. But when he started his opposition, he was conscripted into the army in February of 1915, but it was already starting. By March of 1915, 25 deputies voted against the next vote on war credits. And so this movement started to build, it started to grow, and it started to coalesce some support around it. In 1916, the Socialist youth met in a secret meeting, and they voted as a bloc to join the Spartacist organization. As we pointed out earlier today, this is the way the youth always do in a revolutionary situation. They move to the left, and Germany was no exception. But like other parties of the international, of the burgeoning communist international, these new parties, the German party had an ultra-left bend to it. In fighting against the right-wing opportunist reformist positions of the old Socialist Party leadership, it swung way far to the left and began causing some problems for the leadership, the revolutionary leadership of the organization. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht and some of the other leaders, Leo Jogisch, brought in resolutions at the foundation of Spartacist in order to try to guide it in a revolutionary direction. But there were a couple of things that marked this initiation in December of 1918. The party began with a 2-to-1 rejection of any participation whatsoever in election campaigns. Even though it opened up the possibility to actually challenge the reformist wing of the socialist movement, using the election campaign as a way to raise the profile of the organization, the majority of the delegates at this founding Congress said, no, we're not going to do that. They also tried to counterpose union membership to the new workers' councils that had sprung up in the German Revolution in 1918. Leave the trade unions, only be part of the workers' councils. And this was at a time when workers were streaming into the unions in Germany. In October 1918, just prior to the German Revolution, there were 1.5 million members in the German trade unions. 2 months later, there were 2.2 million. It had already grown by 50% in just 2 months under the impact of the revolution. And 1 year later, it had 7.3 million workers organized into the trade unions. So this ultra-left position of these delegates to the first Spartacist convention were isolating themselves from a real living mass movement that was going on inside of the unions. Rosa Luxemburg took a very patient approach. She said something very similar to the title of one of Lenin's pamphlets. She said, every newborn squalls for a little while. So she basically took a patient approach of trying to wait this out, letting experience show the membership of the organization the correctness of an approach to the masses. Now, in the midst of all of this, the Communist International was beginning to get organized. At the first Congress that took place in March 1919, just after the foundation of the Socialist organization, it had about, I think we said 45 or 50 people at it. Most of the international delegates that attended this first Congress were already in Russia. There was only 9 people that were able to make it through the Allied blockade from outside to join this Congress. But nonetheless, they raised the banner. What the intention was by the Bolsheviks in starting this was to build a new organization with a fresh banner that had no reformists in it, that had no centrists in it, and it's not from any other consideration than to clarify what revolutionary socialism was all about, to build an organization where that could be clearly seen, and then use that as a pole of attraction for building new parties that were capable of clearly leading the way forward. The second Congress took place just a year later, in June, July of 1920. And it was at this Congress where Lenin began the fight against the ultra-left tendencies inside of all of these young parties that were growing up. All of the delegates who came to this Congress were handed a copy of Lenin's Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder when they came into the room. A lot of these ultra-left forces had a misunderstanding about what it meant to be a Bolshevik, that it meant all-out revolutionary insurrection at all times. In this pamphlet, Lenin laid out, well, no, this is how we did it. And he just explained very systematically how it was that the Bolshevik Party was built over a period of 1903 to 1917. All of the ebbs and flows, all of the ups and downs, the struggles they had to go through, the lessons that had to be learned in order for this organization to be able to play the role that it did when the revolution broke out in 1917. And then laid this out as a perspective for the other parties as well. It took aim specifically at 2 different sections of the organization, the British section and the German section, being the 2 most important countries for the revolution at this point, while this revolutionary wave was still unfolding in the period after World War I. And at the end of this Congress, they laid out 21 conditions for joining the Communist International. And this kind of like laid it out. It made sure that any party that wanted to join and become part of the Communist International had to shed all centrism, all opportunism, all reformism. This was going to be a revolutionary international. And so that's what they did. The next year they had a third Congress with over 600 delegates from over 50 countries. And this Congress set a new tone for the parties of the International. The watchword of this Congress was "to the masses." It was to turn the attention of these new parties that had been organized over the previous year or two towards connecting themselves up, connecting the ideas of revolutionary Marxism with the mass movement of the workers. Now, this had been preceded by some ultra-left activity inside of Germany, where the left-wing forces around the Spartacist League had formed a communist party in Germany and had rapidly grown. They had connected up with some left-wing elements of the United Socialist Party of Germany and created a much bigger organization. But at the same time, it held that ultra-left political position. And through the course of time, they initiated a premature activity that's come to be known as the March Actions. This flowed from a mistaken strategy called the theory of the offensive, that was put forward by Zinoviev and one of the Hungarian emissaries from the ECCI, Bela Kun, that sought to actually force the action. And they did this through some really underhanded kind of thing, trying to set up little provocations, set up false flag operations to try to get people to believe that the social democratic government was cracking down on the workers as an excuse to try to build up a mass movement artificially that could then move into power. It didn't work. It couldn't work. And in the aftermath of this fiasco, they lost half of their membership. 200,000 people walked out of the German Communist Party in disgust from what had happened. So the Third Congress of the Communist International had to take up this question. And by 1921, in the middle of the year 1921, it had already become real clear that the revolutionary wave coming out of World War I had ebbed, and stability was starting to be reestablished throughout the capitalist regimes in Europe. There was a couple of events that kind of marked the end of the revolutionary wave. One was the Polish regime had launched an invasion into the Soviet Union. They were chased back out by the Red Army, and the Red Army went on, and they were marching on Warsaw. If they had been able to take Warsaw, the Red Army would have been right on the border with Germany, and all of a sudden it would have changed the situation. But the Red Army was pushed back. They were overextended. They didn't have the supply lines. They didn't have the support infrastructure to support such a thing, and they had to pull back to their borders. So that defeat, combined with the defeat of a massive factory occupation wave that took place in Italy in 1920, in which the leadership of the Socialist Party of Italy, which had come over completely in total to the Communist International, treated it just like it was regular old strike action looking for a better contract, when it was quite clear that the working class in Italy was ready to take power. And because it didn't go all the way, it demoralized the working class movement, it set it back, and that set the stage for the beginning of some attacks on the workers' movement by armed gangs throughout Italy, and the nascence and the growth of the Italian fascist movement under Mussolini, which finally took governmental power in 1922. So with this international situation, the Third Congress of the Communist International took stock of this changed situation and put forward a change of course, a change of perspective for the international movement, saying, hey, it's not going to be weeks or months or years. We might have a little bit of time before the revolutionary situation faces us again. So in the meantime, we got to figure out how to consolidate our organization, how to get contact with the workers who are still organized by these other organizations, so we can build up our forces in preparation for the battles that we know are to come. And the strategy that they came forward to do this was called the United Front. Now, the point of the United Front was two-pronged. Number one, it was to try to find a way to unite all the workers in action around concrete struggles for immediate demands in order to bring everybody together to maximize the strength of the working class struggle. But it was also to, in the course of that, if they won the United Front, to show in action the superiority of the communist program and the ability of the Communist Party to actually play the leading role in these struggles. And if it failed to bring these other organizations together, it wouldn't be because of the intransigence of the communists, not because of their revolutionary perspective, but very clearly because the reformist organizations didn't want anything to do with a struggle for unity. So this was the the thought process behind putting this united front strategy or tactic into motion. Now, in the midst of this, they did not propose that the communist parties simply dissolve themselves into the mass movement. The idea was to maintain the banner, to maintain the program, and to, I think the slogan was, strike together but march separately. This way, they could maintain their political program and shoulder to shoulder with workers from these other organizations, have the discussions, go through the experiences together, and through this activity, both strengthen the working class movement and win these masses of workers to the Communist Party in advance of the next revolutionary wave. Now, this was not met with unanimity inside of the Communist International. In fact, the leader of the Communist International, Grigory Zinoviev, was opposed to this course. He skated around it a little bit, but there was actually division inside of the Russian delegation to the Third Congress of the Communist International. There were 5 delegates. It was Zinoviev, Bukharin, Radek, Lenin, and Trotsky. And the lineup was Lenin and Trotsky against everybody else. So the Third Congress started out with some presentations on the new situation by Trotsky, and he laid it out there, thunderous applause. And then there was a series of amendments that came from the German, the Austrian, and the Czech parties, which in essence completely contradicted everything that Trotsky had laid out in the presentation. And so at a certain point, Lenin had to get up and give a speech explaining why he opposed all of the amendments, why they were completely wrong. And then Trotsky got up after him and put the nail into the coffin. They won the debate. They won over the majority of the delegates to this course that day. And 5 months later, the expanded executive committee of the Communist International actually concretized this discussion by laying out some theses on the United Front, just what it is. And in these theses, it kind of focused on a couple of key countries, saying, this is how you should do it here, this is how you should do it there, these are the things that you need to look at here. But then it laid out some general perspectives as well. The idea, the main idea being that this was a tactic for enhancing the ability of the working class to resist the capitalist attack and for winning the majority of the working class to the communist movement. Now, this shift met a lot of questioning inside of the International. Hey, what are we doing here? We just split with the reformists. Now you want us to work together with these people? What are you doing here? There was a little confusion going on here. But it's actually in line with what the whole movement for the Communist International, what was all about. The first task was to clarify the ideas, to plant the banner, to make sure that everybody knew what the politics of the new organization were. Once that was clear, once that was set, then the idea was take that to the masses. And we're talking here about parties that have tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of members that are already mass organizations themselves, trying to win the majority of the working class in action to these parties. Now, in the course of doing this, there's a few considerations of method that we need to look at that are important, that got handed down from this experience. You might think that, that through the course of a fight like this, where you have very sharply counterposed positions, that the victor would then just, mop the floor with who was left. But that wasn't Lenin's approach at all. His approach was that the ultra-left elements inside of the Comintern were revolutionaries. They were mistaken. They were young. They were inexperienced. They could be won over through experience if we give them the right leadership. So, in sharply posing the political questions, he also, at the end of his presentation, would throw them a conciliatory note saying, hey, this was, the only way you can not make mistakes is by not doing anything. This was a step forward. You're trying to find the way forward. This isn't the way we do it, but we'll give you this much. And in that way, trying to save the forces that were coming around, that were ultra-left in their political orientation, to win them back to Marxism and to save them to advance the organization of these parties. And he did the same thing with Zinoviev and Bukharin inside of the Russian leadership. He didn't turn on them and try to throw them away or anything like that. He tried to keep them in, to try to keep that conversation going, to keep them working on, because there was a shortage of skilled communists inside of the world movement. And they really relied on these people in order to move the situation forward. Lenin and Trotsky were both sure that any time you had a new victory in the revolutionary movement, it would completely transform the situation. There would be new forces coming in, there would be a new situation inside of the Comintern, and you would be able to then move forward in a more sure way. But anyway, these are the conditions under which the United Front came forward. There was a situation later on in 1923. There was another revolutionary upsurge in Germany. But in this case, the leadership of the German Communist Party, having had their fingers burnt with some ultra-left actions a couple of years earlier, were gun-shy. And even though there was a revolutionary situation that broke out, they pulled back from actually moving it forward. And the German Revolution in 1923 failed as well. So some lessons had to be drawn from that. They still didn't get it. This is unfortunate because there was 1918, there was 1919, there was 1921, there was 1923. All four of these revolutionary situations failed, and that set the stage for the further situation, which included the degeneration of the Communist International under the rule of Zinoviev and Stalin, and the subsequent lack of ability to continue to educate the Communist Party in Germany and in other countries, and directly led to some more ultra-leftism with the Third Period, and then the coming to power of Hitler, and then a complete backing into reformism, looking for a deal with the capitalist class, with the Popular Front in the 1930s. So this is the result of the failure of this. But in any case, the United Front and a tactic that came out of the experience of the Comintern, that came out of the experience of the mass movement in Germany, is something that has been passed down to us as a lesson that we can still find application for, even while we're a small organization today, but it'll play an even bigger role as we move forward.